All right, we're good. Welcome to another episode of Tom Kennedy's Science, where we explore the universe. And today, we're going to touch a little bit on the evolutionary importance of prokaryotes. Now, there's one thing I want you to keep in mind here, and that is prokaryotes are not necessarily primitive, even though they are smaller and more simple than the eukaryotes. And the reason why is these bacteria and archaeans, some of them have incredibly quick generation times, and that allows for very rapid evolution. I mean, in some cases, they can reproduce every 20 minutes, right? So humans like 20 years, these prokaryotes can be in 20 minutes. It's kind of interesting. If you're over the age of about 24, you have more generations of E. coli living in your gut than there are generations separating humans from our last common ancestor with chimpanzees. So that quick generation time gives these guys really rapid evolution. And as a result, prokaryotes have just evolved to live in many, many different places. And we call these extremophiles. And they can live in hot or acidic environments. And they can do both at the same time, right? They can live in really salty environments. We're talking like 35% salinity, not 35 parts per thousand in the ocean, but much saltier than that. And some prokaryotes, they can live in really cold environments. They can live in like rocks in the Antarctic, under 2 miles of Antarctic ice. And then, of course, some bacteria and prokaryotes live way down at the bottom of the ocean under extreme pressure and also extreme heat as well. So they have evolved to live in a lot of different places and in very extreme environments because of their rapid evolution. And, their evolution has been really important. Like I said, these guys are not primitive. And they've evolved lots of evolutionary innovations, just lots of them. It's all in their metabolism for the most part and where they're able to survive. But when it comes to prokaryotic evolution, in addition to like, if you're, a plant biologist, you're probably going nitrogen fixing. But for a lot of what we want to talk about, there are two key evolutionary innovations that we want to discuss that led to this really diverse world that we see today. All right. So that first evolutionary innovation that prokaryotes that I want to talk about is photosynthesis. No plant ever evolved photosynthesis. But sometime around 3.5 billion years ago, a cyanobacteria, or at least the ancestors of cyanobacteria, evolved the ability to do photosynthesis. And photosynthesis basically means putting together by light. All right, so we're going to take some carbon dioxide plus some water with the energy in sunlight, and we can fix that into an organic molecule like a carbohydrate. All right. And then in the process, we also, or at least photosynthesis also releases oxygen as a byproduct. Now, the very first important thing about photosynthesis is that it made a lot more carbon and energy available to ecosystems. So what that means is you've got more stuff available to work with. So we could see a ratcheting up in the diversity of ecosystems, thank you to photosynthesis. Okay. And then photosynthesis, as you know, also added oxygen to the atmosphere because oxygen from oxygenic photosynthesis, right? That's the byproduct. And at first, it was pretty rough on life, and life had to evolve ways to deal with it. So over time, when the first cells first evolved 4 billion years ago, 3.8 billion years ago, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere was 0.01%. So if you were to go back to the early Earth, you could breathe the air, but you would die within a few minutes because there's no oxygen. But once oxygenic photosynthesis evolved, it started to constantly pump oxygen into the atmosphere, and oxygen levels slowly arose. And by about 2 billion years ago, we got the evolution of aerobic respiration, and then eventually animals. And let's talk about this. But before I jump into that, photosynthesis utterly changed the world, right? Not only by adding more carbon and more energy to our ecosystems, allowing for greater diversity and more complexity, but the oxygen affected like every aspect of the surface of the planet, because we went from an atmosphere that was reducing, that was donating, electrons and very conducive for living things, to an oxidizing atmosphere that where the oxygen would react with everything, organic molecules. And we go from a planet looking like Mustafar here, where Jedis go to die, to a world that we see today, our beautiful blue planet, right? And the water is blue because the oxygen rusted all of the iron. It oxidized all of the iron out of the water. It cleared up the atmosphere of methane and ammonia and other particulates. And it just, so the atmosphere became very clear. And today it's, 22% oxygen, which is, life can use that. And by adding a lot of oxygen to the atmosphere, it also created an ozone layer. And we're pretty aware of the ozone layer. It protects us from ultraviolet light. It protects the entire surface. And ultraviolet light packs quite a punch. It's enough that it just shreds organic molecules. It breaks them apart. So organic life would have a very difficult time living on the surface of the planet. Probably couldn't if we didn't have an ozone layer. And the ozone layer also protected the water on the planet, right? So eventually, if all the water would go high up in the atmosphere, the ultraviolet light would eventually it would split the water into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen would take off into space. The oxygen would react with whatever minerals or organic molecules around, and eventually the Earth would dry up and look something like Mars. So, oxygen from photosynthesis, like I said, it greatly changed the world and it energized life. And it did that through, you already probably guessed it, aerobic respiration. Animals did not evolve aerobic respiration, not at all. It was done by bacteria. And aerobic respiration, basically you take an organic molecule, like a sugar you get out of photosynthesis, and you can use oxygen. And from that, you break down your organic molecules to carbon dioxide and water, right? So here it is. We got glucose plus oxygen. We're going to yield carbon dioxide and water. And what aerobic respiration does is make life really efficient at making ATP. ATP is the energy currency of life. And because of oxygen, using it as, once you learn aerobic respiration, it's a final electron acceptor, which means you can get a lot more work when you out of the electrons. But basically what we're doing is when we break down those organic materials, we're able to extract a lot more energy out of it and convert that energy in carbohydrates and fats to ATP. So now not only do we have more carbon available, not only do we have more energy available, not only is life being protected by the ozone layer, but now we're more efficient at extracting that energy. And of course, aerobic respiration led to something called endosymbiosis and the evolution of eukaryotes. See, it was the origins of mitochondria from a bacterial ancestor that could do aerobic respiration. So here it is. We've got an archaean, which is one of the two types of prokaryotes. And somehow, we don't really know how this happened, but an aerobic bacteria, an aerobically responding bacteria merged with that archaean, and it is slowly evolved into the eukaryotic cells we see today. So the merger of eukaryotic cells led to the evolution of eukaryotes, which was one of the greatest restructuring events of cells in 2 billion years of evolutionary history. So mitochondria and aerobic respiration paved the way for the evolution of eukaryotes and multicellular life. And then eventually, plants evolved through a second round of endosymbiosis, and that's where we get our chloroplast from, our inside of cells. So think about that. Every single plant and animal and fungus is comprised of eukaryotic cells, and all of this was made possible by the evolution of photosynthesis, aerobic respiration, and then the merger of two prokaryotes in a process called endosymbiosis. All right, well, I hope you learned something today. Until next time, stay curious.